I'm a 19-year-old French student. This happened last week. I was heading to my apartment after just seeing a friend. I took the tramway at 11:30 p.m. because I didn't feel comfortable walking alone at night. As soon as I sat down, a man who was already sitting nearby came and sat right in front of me. Immediately, I got a very strange vibe about him, so I told my boyfriend by chat. Then, I stood up to get off the tram once we arrived at my stop, but the man quickly got out after me. He was weirdly following me, not exactly walking behind me, but next to me to the side. I was getting very anxious, knowing that something was wrong about this situation. Still, though, I continued to walk to the avenue I live in. I crossed the road towards my abode, and he did not, so I thought at first it was okay. A few seconds later, though, after a slight delay, he crossed the road too, and started walking behind me. He passed me by at some point, walking slightly in front of me. I thought at this point that maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe he really was just walking this way too. As we neared my building, though, he stopped and waited until I met up with him. At this point, he turned around and asked me if I had a boyfriend and all that sort of thing. I answered immediately. Yeah, sorry, good evening," as polite as can be. He proceeded to leave in front of me, so I was walking a bit slower for him to get farther and farther away. I wanted to make sure he didn't know I was almost home. Once I felt he was far enough away, I turned into the little pathway leading to the lobby of my building. I was still feeling anxious about this man, though, even as I watched him continue to walk away. I thought I had put my keys into my pocket, but it turned out they were still in my bag. I was shaking so much that it took me multiple attempts to grab them. Finally, though, I managed to get them and open the magnetic door. I thought of closing the door immediately after me, just in case the man still wanted to follow me. The door was closed, but the magnetic system hadn't quite clicked on yet. I saw the man begin running towards me immediately. He pushed on the door violently, with these horrific eyes looking at me. The door was made of clear glass, so I totally saw his expression. That's when I knew this was real trouble. Without even thinking, I screamed as loud as I could. I think that's what saved my life. The man immediately opened the door and ran to me. He shoved me hard onto the ground and started to choke me. I was too stunned because I hadn't been prepared for such a violent, direct assault. He was choking me so hard I couldn't even scream or breathe, and nobody was coming to help. I really thought I was going to die right there, looking into his bulging eyes, gazing directly into mine, with pure hate. I'm a very small size, so I really wasn't able to do anything with my arms at all. I think in real time it wasn't that long, but it felt like an eternity, and I even lost consciousness for a moment. When I opened my eyes again, he had just started running away. I saw the caretaker's wife kneeling beside me. The caretaker was chasing after the man, but did not manage to catch him in the end. He came back and called the police, though, who caught the man within 10 minutes of the events thanks to our description. I really don't know why he did that to me, because when he attacked me, he didn't sexually assault me or even rob me, which would have been really easy. I can't understand. It seems like his only goal was to kill me. I'll never be thankful enough to my caretaker who came to help me and saved my life, because nobody else in the building called the police or even tried to help. The man was judged 3 days later, and is in jail now. He denied everything, even though the caretaker and I identified him directly, and there are video proofs of him following me too. I'm a 14-year-old female. This happened to me about 2 months ago when my family and I went to visit my uncles and aunts who live up north. Every time we visit my family, me and my siblings stay for a bit longer than our parents. One of our uncles usually drops us off back home. After maybe 5 or 6 days, my parents had already left to get back to work. This meant it was me, my sister, and my cousins, and their family, of course. I've always had this habit of bike riding around the neighborhood since this town is pretty hilly and the roads are fun to go down. To give a little background of this place, it's quite a small city. People know each other very well, and it's really green around here. Naturally, the weather stays quite pleasant as well. So, I, as always, took my cousin's bike and went out for a ride. Usually I like to do a full tour around the neighborhood, but this time I felt like I was old enough to go a bit further away and explore the outside. Big mistake. I set out and headed down this narrow street between the hills. It wasn't too far away from my house, but if you cycle your way there, it takes about 45 minutes or so. It was kind of breezy out and my hair was open. It felt like the best thing ever to feel it flowing through. Stepping out of my main character feeling moment, I realized I'd been out for about an hour now and it was close to 6:30. The sun would be setting very soon, and I had to get back before it got dark. The hills were in the most secluded part of town, so barely any people came around that way. The roads were also not in the best shape, so I decided to go a little bit slower in order to avoid injuring myself. Well, about 10 minutes later, I spot this white old Corolla drive slowly past me. I paid no heed to it at first and continued on my way home. Only a minute later, though, it drives right past me again, and again, and again, for 4 more times. At this point, I was starting to get very concerned since the sun was already setting, and I could easily tell I would not make it home before it got dark. On top of that weird car kept passing by me. I picked up my speed while doing my best to avoid the small pointy rocks that could easily flatten my tires. My cousin owns those old-style bikes with tube tires that you need to pump once a month. A couple of minutes later, the car comes back, but this time it pulls up right in front of me. Hurriedly, I slam on my brakes as to not slam into the car. As I regain my balance, I shout angrily at the driver, "Yo, are you fucking blind or what?" No response. The car door opens, and this man, easily 6 feet or more, I'd say in his late 20s and built as fuck, steps out of the car. In the most polite tone I've probably ever heard, he says, "Sorry, I wasn't looking." I shrugged my shoulders and picked my bike up and started heading back home. It was already dark out now, and I didn't want to stay on this empty road with a strange man, especially while he was in a car and I was only on a bike. I started heading forward when he called out to me, "I could drop you off at home, you know." I curtly rejected him and got on my bike. "It's okay, you can come, I'm alone today anyway," he says, getting louder. I reply no and keep on moving. He didn't say anything after and just hopped in his car. I took a big breath of relief and started moving forward, thinking about how creepy this dude was. Just as I was about to take the turn for the main road, which was thankfully full of people, this man yelled again, "You're gonna be tired, baby. You've been cycling for so long." I looked back at him with a puzzled face. He's still following me? I shot him a "what the fuck do you think you're doing" kinda look. At this point, he fully stopped his car and hopped out all the way. He started sprinting towards me. By now, I was freaking the fuck out of myself because I had no idea what this man wanted with me. I tried to increase my speed and flee away before he could reach me. Unfortunately for me though, somehow this man managed to channel Usain Bolt and ran so fast that he caught up with me. He grabbed my shoulder, causing me to lose my balance. I tried to stop my bike and yell at him at full volume to hopefully attract some attention. He actually stopped for a moment, but the next minute he grabbed me by the arms and started dragging me off my bike. At this point, I was full on screaming for a single person to come help me. But looking around, no one really cared enough to pay attention, so I just continued my futile struggling. After putting up a fight for another minute or so, I completely lost my balance and my bike fell out from under me. In a second, the man picked me up and started dragging me away to the car. I was too angry or scared, I don't even know, but my adrenaline kicked in full force. I kicked the man in his ankle. His nuts were too far away for my legs to reach. Because of this, he kind of lost his balance and wobbled about a bit. I took the opportunity, stood up and elbowed him as hard as I could in his chest. He looked shocked for a second, but then went in for my arms again. At this point, I started running. I left my bike to die for God's sake, and made my best run for it. Thankfully, the man didn't follow me, and I didn't stop to check if he was either. I reached home about 30 minutes later or something, drenched in sweat and panting like a dog. My aunt yelled at me for coming home so late, and how they were worried sick. I didn't tell them what happened. I just made up a story about how I lost the bike and had to walk all the way home. Later that night, I told my sister the entire thing though, and she convinced me to call our mother and tell her everything. My mom talked to my uncles and aunts, and they all decided to keep it down and not tell the police, since it would be next to impossible to find the man now. He might have already left even in fear of getting caught. At the time this happened, I was a 23-year-old female, and also a student. I was living alone in a small apartment complex not too far away from my school. I've never really liked living alone. I was also quite afraid of the dark. However, I always felt safe in my little apartment. It only had one way to get in, and you needed to unlock 2 doors to get inside, the main front door to the building and the door to my apartment. I also used to have a few lights on even at night, and my laptop was usually playing some movie until I fell asleep. I always remembered to lock my door too, except for this one time. One weekend, I was out drinking with my friends. When I was going back home, I ended up sharing a taxi with some random guy who happened to be going to the same area as me. We both jumped out of the taxi outside my place and talked for a little bit. It turned out he was about the same age as me, and he also happened to be a student as well. He walked me to my front door, we said goodnight, and I went inside. Some weeks, maybe a month or so later, I decided to stay home for the weekend. I was just watching some series in my bed until I fell asleep, when suddenly I was awoken by a voice. I couldn't really hear what the voice was saying, but I could hear that it was definitely a man talking. I shot my eyes open, and I saw a shadow standing in the doorway of my bedroom. I froze, and my adrenaline started pumping. I couldn't even find the courage to scream. I just kept staring at that figure. He stopped talking at that point, and I quietly asked, "Who are you?" He took a step closer and whispered into my ear, "Don't you remember me?" He was very clearly drunk, but I suddenly realized it was the exact same guy I'd shared a taxi with some weeks ago. At first, I felt some weird feeling of relief that I recognized him, but at the same time, I was completely horrified. I didn't want to provoke him, so I asked him very calmly what he was doing here. "I was just thinking about you. I turned off your lights and closed your laptop." He smiled. I kept staring at him, still in my bed. I asked him how the hell he'd gotten into my building. He said he'd been ringing my doorbell, but I didn't open. So he tried all my neighbors until someone opened up for him. He also went into my neighbor's apartment at first, but realized it wasn't mine. Then he saw my name on one of the doors and went in. I think he could see the fear in my eyes at that point. "I think I should go." He stumbled out, and I went out right after him. Before I could catch him, though, he turned around and said, "You know, you should really lock your door." I shut the door in his face and locked it immediately after. I went back to bed and cried. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. I never called the police, but I did tell my friends the next day. The following months, someone would ring my doorbell every now and then in the middle of the night, and I would get an anxiety attack every time. I never opened it up, but I had the feeling it was definitely him. I never saw the guy in person again, though. I'm relieved that nothing else happened that night. And from that day forward, I always double-checked that I had the doors locked. I also removed my name from the door, too. So after crying just a little bit after looking at crime scenes on the internet, I think it's about time to tell this story. It's just one of those moments when I randomly start thinking about it in a more serious mood than usual. It's gonna be a long one. This happened about 4 months ago now. Maybe a bit more, but I can't really say for sure. Anyway, I was 19 years old. I've turned 20 since then in mid-February. I was going home from university after class. Usually I take my keys with me, but around that time I had lost them, and my mom had yet to make me a new copy. I remember I kept insisting she do so, but she just kept forgetting. So what I'd do was knock on the door to get my younger brother's attention so he'd come and let me in. My mom also took away his keys though and just left him there locked up as well. I asked my brother to pass me my charger from my room and called one of my aunties to see if I could go hang out at her workplace in the meantime. She said yes, then told me to call an Uber that she'd be paying for as soon as I got there. So that's what I did. Now, the Uber didn't pick me up exactly at home. It was at the house across the street instead. I don't know if there was a special reason for it. The guy just decided to do so. The moment I saw the guy, he immediately gave me kind of a weird vibe. I also know, though, that I tend to get paranoid every time I so much as hop in a taxi, so I decided to just let it roll off me and got inside. I rolled down the window and kept a grip on both of my phones. At first, it seemed like a relatively normal ride, until we got to the area where my aunt's workplace was. It was a convenience store at her home in a housing complex. Instead of turning into it though, he completely drove right past it, claiming he was following the GPS. When I asked him about it though, he wouldn't let me see the coordinates he'd put in. He sure seemed to know exactly where he was going though. I was kind of doomed from the beginning, I realized, because I didn't know the directions to this place, and I could only rely on the driver being a good person and recognizing the area. I did so, but wherever he was taking me now, I had no idea. I remember seeing this fountain that I could recognize from when my mom drove to my uncle's place, but that was way further away than where we were supposed to be going. By now, I was kind of trying to think of what to do because this guy had driven past a fuck ton of empty housings, and a couple of them even seemed to be still under construction. He stopped the car in this place that looked like the end of civilization. We were literally on a hill surrounded by nothing. He then turned off the car. I realize now that I got lucky in so many ways looking back on it. My phone had no credit, but as soon as I thought of that, my aunt called me and asked, "Where are you?" I literally felt my heart drop in my chest because I had no idea, and now the dude was dead staring at me. I told her honestly that I had no idea, and asked him out loud, "Hey, where did you take me?" He replied with a curt, "I don't know what to tell you, kid." That was enough for me. I grabbed my backpack and slammed the door open real quick, with a loud, "That's fine, I'll see myself out." I hauled ass immediately like I hadn't in a very long time. I remember even being afraid of carrying my backpack on my back in case he'd chase me and pull on it. I held it tight in my hand with my hoodie wrapped around my waist as I thought of a good place to hide. I thought of knocking on someone's door, but for some reason that didn't seem safe to me at the moment. I remember telling my aunt not to hang up too, because he was still following me in his car. At this point, I saw an empty barren surrounded by concrete walls and a strong barred gate. It appeared there was enough space under the gate to crawl in though, so I literally threw my backpack down and crawled under that hole. There was a huge electric control box, which I opened and crouched inside to hide in, my aunt still on the phone. She, my other aunt, and my uncle were all on the call with each other, putting credit onto my phone while asking for my live location through WhatsApp, since I had no idea where I was. It was literally the middle of nowhere. I waited for about 2 hours, while this guy kept circling and would not leave. I even had to go pee outside the box and immediately run back inside to hide. There were tons of tiny spiders and old honeycombs, so I was fighting both my arachnophobia and trypophobia as well. At some point, I'm guessing the guy eventually left, since my uncle got there in his truck. He couldn't tell where I was, so he had to keep honking and telling me to tell him when I could hear it closer. When I finally heard him nearby, I got out. For a while, I thought maybe this had just been a misunderstanding. Maybe I jumped out of some guy's car like a maniac without even paying him. But when I got home after staying at my aunt's place for a while, I checked my phone and the Uber app. Not only did it say I'd already paid, but it also said I'd made it safely to my destination, so I immediately ruled that out. I told my aunts not to tell my mom about this because she goes absolutely insane over the most minor inconvenience, so telling her this would not only freak her out, but she'd also be of no help at all. I only let her know when I called her to come get me, and on our way to get a copy of that key. Because of course, something bad had to happen until she actually listened to me. Nowadays, she always puts credit on my phone as well. Anyway, that's what went down. I had to Indiana Jones that shit twice, and to this day, my family brags about how I was able to keep myself perfectly composed and react quickly, which even I'm still shocked about. I remember seeing broken glass and metal bars laying around, and telling my aunt, if I'm going down, I'm taking him with me. On our way home, I remember my mom telling me I only wasn't in hysterics because I was in shock, and it had hit me the next day. It never did though. I kept going around as normal, but last week she brought it up again and asked if I didn't think I was gonna die at the time. I said of course I did, but I also knew freaking out would either only make me an easier target, or just not help me in any way. When I remember all of this, I feel more scared than angry really. Things really could have gone terribly wrong. My parents believed this guy was a rookie who maybe felt sorry for me and let me go in the end, because if he wanted to, he really could have hurt me with some sort of weapon, or just tried to kill me right then and there. I don't even know anymore. I sent his profile to all the girls I know, so that if they ever happen to get him as their Uber driver, they can cancel. Since then, I also don't take Ubers anymore.